We're live at The Glenn Show. I'm Glenn Loury, host of The Glenn Show, emeritus professor of economics at Brown University, and happy to welcome you to this live stream edition, July 3rd, 2026. The day before America's 250th birthday will be officially celebrated, and that's the subject of our conversation here at The Glenn Show and on this occasion. I'm joined by Nikita Petrov, who's creative director of The Glenn Show, Mark Sussman, who's writer and editor at The Glenn Show, and Robert Patton Spruill, who is friend and colleague here at The Glenn Show. And we're going to be talking about America on its 250th birthday. We'll be joined in due course by my colleague and collaborator and dear economist, professional friend, Rajiv Sethi, who's professor of economics at Barnard College, Columbia University. He'll be coming on. He is himself a naturalized American citizen, born in India, educated in the United Kingdom and the United States, and someone with whom I've worked on one thing or another closely over the last quarter century. But to get us started, let me kick it off to Nikita to introduce the topic of our conversation today.
Well, let's get started. So we said that I would kick it off. One of the questions that we brought up in preparation for the conversation was, what does it mean to be an American? It seems like a contested issue these days. People have different definitions. And I thought I can offer a view from afar. We've got these three Americans here who actually have something to say, and I have what I'm sure is a caricature of a view, but caricatures sometimes, exaggerate features that are nevertheless there. So maybe that provocation would be useful. And it comes by way of a story. So I left Russia in 2022 without knowing where I'm going. We packed things, and me and my wife landed in Armenia. And so then we had many conversations about what are our options. Where can we go? There are a few countries in Europe that seem doable. There's the post-Soviet territory. I've been working with Americans for like 10 years. So is that an option? And I noticed that when weighing these different places as possible futures, I think about them differently. So when we talked about Europe, there's Spain and there's Germany. Those are different countries. There are different people there. They have different ways of life. Germany sounds stressful. Spain does not sound stressful. We're thinking about a society that is a certain way, and then are you going to fit? How much you would need to adjust? Would you be able to adjust? Will they accept you? How much of a match this is? And when the US came up, this almost flipped into, like, if you are moving to the US, then the vision of future that I imagine, say I move to the US and live there for 10 years and become a proud American, what does that look like? And that looks less like I'm integrated in a society called the United States of America. It's more like I'm an individual here. I got my own piece of land. I probably have guns to protect the piece of land if somebody trespasses. So it's rest my vision is, which again, I'm sure is somewhat over caricature, is the country rests on freedom of speech and private property, which are not given. They need to be protected. The government might want to take your freedom of speech away. And then as a good American, even a newly immigrant, you need to fight back against that. And if I'm thinking, if I move to Spain, what would my life be like? Imagine myself a part of this thing. If I move into America, what my life would look like, if I can make it, it's whatever I build out of it. I'm leaning on myself more than I'm integrating into a society. And I suppose today I realized that second question, I guess, is when you're thinking where in the US you would want to move. The South or the North, a small town or a big town. There, this becomes a consideration. What are these places are like, and can you be a part of that smaller community? But the country itself, the idea of America, to me, is less of a like coherent, here's how things are done here, and is more you become an individual leaning just on yourself, your personal network, and then the way things are done in this place is how it shakes up in the end after all of these individuals and groups and with their competition. Well, they never end. It's just like it's a continually changing place. The dominant language may change, and that would not go against what America is. The demographics may change completely and would not go against what America is, because it rests on the individual. So that is I'll end with a little clip that to me encompasses this view. One of the most American characters that I have seen is Hunter S. Thompson. And here's just 40 seconds from a documentary about him.
Get out! You chicken shit bastard! You get let me shoot 7%. Bird shot, you asshole!
The people who did this Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were good people.
Hey, like this!
And it's a good place. Here we are in the middle of it, right up on the mountain. If this son of a bitch wants to bitch about his cows over here and shoot at me, well, it's our country. It's not theirs. It's not a bunch of used car dealers from Southern California. Democracy, you have to be a player.
In the democracy, you have to be a player. So what do you guys think? What of this is remotely right? What do you disagree with completely?
Mark, you have a pregnant with thought look on your face.
I'm just thinking about Hunter S. Thompson. Oh man, what a guy. You have to wonder exactly which chemicals are flowing through his system when he's answering this question. Could be anything. Individualism, individuality, yes, of course, that's kind of a part of the fabric of this country in one way or another. But I wonder if it's that stark. Because one way to think about what you've just said, the kind of vision of the country that you've just proposed, is kind of bleak, because there is something that's invigorating about the idea that you can control or at least have a lot of influence over your place in the world if you're here, because there's a lot of latitude granted toward the individual. But there's a lot of conditions put on that latitude as well. Individuality within a certain frame. And that's going to be true no matter where. But, we all know that you can't just rely on yourself. If we're going to quote Barack Obama, right? You didn't build that. And what he meant by that is, whatever you've done to achieve success on your own terms, you've used some public resources in order to do it, even if it's only driving on the roads in order to get where you're going, or using the post office or what have you. So I would want to kind of like turn down the volume a little bit on how starkly Americanism is. And there's, of course, a certain irony to being like, here's Hunter S. Thompson, a paradigmatic American individual, and he's shooting at his neighbor, which is, I don't think how most of us have. I don't think that's most of our relationships to our neighbors, hopefully. I mean, I think that the neighbor...
And the neighbor is shooting back, is he not?
Yeah, sounds like it.
It may be that he staged this for the documentary. Who knows?
Well, maybe. Who knows?
But
maybe Hunter S.
But
Thompson
those are live bullets,
it.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Maybe Hunter S. Thompson staged it. I don't know if the neighbor knew that it was being staged. But and I think we'll get into this later. Community is an equally important part of this, and who you actually surround yourself with, and how that kind of individualism takes shape within an actual lived environment in which none of us are really islands unto ourselves. I mean, Rob, that's something that you talk a lot about. So I'm wondering if you want to pick up the baton here.
Well, I mean, my whole goal in life is to be ungovernable. And, I'm a libertarian, which means I'm even more on that side of rights and all the other stuff. But, the free speech thing and explaining it to a Russian, like, that's not really real. like the government can't mess with you, but your employer certainly can. And, that's something we found out directly here on this podcast. Like free speech, that's a myth. I mean, it's all a bit of a myth. The government can take your stuff anytime it wants, no, we're just a kinder, gentler feudalism here, as I think the best way to put it in my experience. But I mean, it's really about first of all, Hunter S. Thomas, that was a pistol gunfight at long range. No one knew. They knew they weren't going to hurt each other. And just speaking of, of living up here in the mountains with people like that, that's just a long range, distant argument. But it's, not that common. Let me make sure that's clear to you, my Russian brother. It does happen. In Appalachia, that's quite familiar, but that looked like the American West to me.
He's in Colorado.
Yeah. So, but we have that. That's common, or relatively common, but it's not really who we are. The free speech thing, you guys have the wrong idea of who we are. Like the government can't arrest us for saying something, but your boss can certainly fire you for saying something. And in our country, our employment is connected to our health care. So thus we become virtual slaves to our employers. And, leaving a job is a scary thing to do. So really it's about folks that have passive income or don't have passive income. And that's one of the great divides here in America.
What do you most love about America, if anything, Rob?
Oh, I love my country. I would laugh to the European. I love ice water. You people don't have, for some reason, y'all are stinking with the ice. You go to, they give click. No, but what I really love is that I love that we are everybody. I love when I go to downtown and there's a Jamaican restaurant, there's a Chinese food, Italian food. I love the fact that our art is based on our diversity and stuff. I mean, I love our country. I love the fact that I can start a business and I don't have to bribe 20 people to do it. I love the fact that my property is partially protected, that I can evict a tenant, Lawan. I love that. I want, these things are important. It's hard to, although I find America to be very socialist, I do believe in having a backstop for people that can't take care of themselves, that need help. And I love the fact that we do that. I think the thing I don't like about America is our interventionist policy, in that we think that our way of life is better than someone else's. And how, what other is America the only non-ethno state? Maybe Canada? Am I getting this wrong? Or maybe Mexico? But
the UK?
Yeah, maybe the UK. But I think that they're pretty proudly English, Scottish, and Irish. And I don't know. That's a really, my thought is that I love not being in an ethno state. Sure, France is nice, Italy's nice, but it's full of French and Italians. It's kind of like, that should only last for me about 6 weeks.
Thompson says, you need to be a player. You're going to be an American, you need to be a player. I like that I am a citizen of a nation which is a player. I like that I stand with my fellow Americans in the midst of it's arguable greatest national enterprise in the history of humankind. I like that I belong to a continental national population, even though I'm aware of the fact that it became a continental national population via conquest and appropriation. I like being at the cutting edge of history in the making, even though I don't like much of the imperial exercise of that power that I see playing itself out throughout the American history. So, liberty, prosperity, dynamism, diversity. I like it.
Just think about who we are. My grandfather was born a sharecropper with a dirt floor. And, I'm Professor Emeritus of Emerson College, 80, 90 years later. it still works. And I think that that's something to be proud of, to be honest with you. I love the fact that we can still do things. It may seem harder, Mark, but we can still get things done.
Let me introduce Rajiv, who's joined us on the screen here, Rajiv Sethi from Paris. And thank you, Rajiv, very much. And this is a conversation about the United States on its 250th birthday, to which I was very delighted to learn that you were willing to contribute. You and I, in our long sojourn on the road in Bogota, teaching in summer school and elsewhere, have shared thoughts and ideas about it. You are an American, not by birth, but by choice, married to an American woman. Your son, Shiva, is an American, and your perspective on these questions is of great interest, at least to me. So welcome to the conversation.
Welcome.
Hi, Rajiv.
Thank you, Glenn, and thanks for including me. This is a wonderful topic. I've been listening in while I was in the waiting room. So, I'm just glad to be part of it, and I'm happy to share my perspective.
Well, what are your thoughts on this occasion, this August 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence?
Well, you were talking a moment ago about what you love and appreciate about the country, so maybe I can start with that. I am very, very attached to the idea that American identity is creedal, or there's a strong tradition of that in the country. This is something that Francis Fukuyama has written about recently also, that it means a lot to him. And it's a tradition that gets pushed back from time to time. And you have got different visions of what it means to be American. But there's one that seems to be survive all attempts to displace it. And there's this famous speech, I think, by Reagan, which talks about the fact that you can live in Germany, you can live in France and never become French. Live in Germany, never become German or truly German, but you can become American in a heartbeat. Really, I'm paraphrasing, but this idea that identity is creedal matters a great deal to me. Another thing that matters is, of course, the principles that are laid out in the founding documents, especially the Declaration of Independence insistence on equality as self-evident. So that's Benjamin Franklin editing Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson had said that it was sacred and undeniable that we, all men are created equal, and Benjamin Franklin replaced it with self-evident. And this is a profoundly radical idea at the time. I don't think most people subscribe to it, but this has held firm, and I think it has spread throughout the world. I think people, 250 years ago, aside from a small minority, would not have subscribed to that idea, and now I think it is seen as almost embarrassing to deviate from it. So that's extremely valuable to me. And one more thing I'll mention is the fact, and this is really from an amazing essay by Ralph Ellison in 1970 in Time magazine, where he talks about the fact that America is really a hybrid culture. It is, it is not. It has a lot of European influence, but it is not European. It is not even really Western. And he uses the example of Mark Twain really to illustrate how, even a literature that emerged in America could not possibly have emerged elsewhere. The confluence of forces and cultures that led to somebody like Mark Twain and then subsequently Hemingway and others. And this is I'll stop here. I'll stop in a second, but I want to contrast this with the speech that Marco Rubio made recently at the Munich Security Conference. It was just a few months ago where he talked about how much U.S. history and culture is dependent on Europe or from European influence, and he talked specifically about language, and he talked about people who had arrived in the U.S. from Europe, and he specifically mentioned Mark Twain. And you've got these very, very contrasting approaches about whether Mark Twain could have been even possible in Europe. I just don't think it's at all possible. that's something that's uniquely American. So I should stop there. I've rattled on for a while.
Let me ask Mark to comment. He's a professor of American literature.
Former.
At least he used to be.
It's funny that you mentioned this with Twain and language, because in the preface to Huckleberry Finn, Twain makes a claim that I don't think is probably true, but it's interesting, which is that he says that in the book there are something like 14 discernible dialects of English that he has kind of captured on the page. And I always thought that was interesting. I mean, I have a kind of, I have a whole academic spiel about that, which I will say, spare you. But I think it's interesting that even within the kind of supposed unity of the English language, you have this kind of internal diversity that this book is, that's kind of one of its aesthetic markers. All of the dialect that is kind of transcribed on the page. And if you don't know what English sounds like, and even if you do know what English sounds like, it is kind of difficult to read in spots because you sort of have to sound it out. And I think it's a very interesting way to kind of force readers of the book to deal with that kind of internal diversity. And it's kind of like an emblem in some ways for what the book is doing with race, with Huck and Jim, with these two people who kind of, where there's this great love between them, although that happens across this boundary. And the entire, one of the kind of devices of the book is Huck's guilt about helping Jim, that he feels like he's doing something wrong, that he feels like he's going to be condemned to hell for helping his friend because he has been taught that crossing that line is something that one doesn't do, and then he does it anyway because there are more powerful forces driving him to do it. And there's something in that book especially, that makes it quite ironic that Rubio would draw on the example of Twain in order to demonstrate something about
exactly right. And this is a point that Ellison made very strongly, and people may disagree with it, but he says specifically that it's a language. He says the American nation, I'm quoting here, is in a sense a product of the American language, a colloquial speech that began emerging long before the British colonials and Africans were transformed into Americans. And he goes on to say that whether it is admitted or not, much of the sound of that language is derived from the timbre of the African voice and the listening habits of the African ear. And he goes on. He says, without Huck and Jim, there's no American novel, really. And the point that you just made, I think, is just made very, very beautifully by Ellison in that essay. If I could just say one more thing, Glenn, I don't want to talk too long, but what I love, I tell you, there's a verse in a song, a patriotic song, America the Beautiful, that is seldom sung. It was added by the composer of the lyrics in 1911. It was not in the original version, but it's seldom sung, but it is incredible verse. It says, America, America, God mend thine every flaw. Confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law. And, this idea of America as a flawed nation that we should love, because those flaws are, being confronted honestly and being mended. That's at least the hope. Is incredible. I don't know any patriotic song anywhere in the world that speaks about the country's flaws in its history and culture so openly. So that's one thing I absolutely love.
Well, let me flip the script here a little bit and ask you, what do you hate about America, if anything?
So I think before I joined, I think Robert had mentioned an aversion to the adventurism, military adventurism overseas, the use of American military power in very, haphazard, I think unjustified and ham-handed ways, frankly, that is not appealing at all. To me, I don't consider myself a libertarian as Robert does, but that's certainly one thing that I find disturbing.
I was about to say something about you condemning America while on foreign soil and in Paris, no less. I mean, hate. I mean, come on, Glenn. Hate about America. I mean, are we going to use those terms?
Well, I don't mean it to be anything other than a suggestion, an invitation to criticize. Hate is a strong term. I agree.
Yeah.
But has America the arsenal of democracy, the guarantor of global security, Pax Americana? The Europeans dragged us through 2 horrible world wars, etc. I mean, compared to what America's exercise of influence in the world is, not perfect to be sure, but compared to what? That's really a question to all of us, because there's plenty to criticize, but the absence of American assertiveness doesn't come without its own cost. Is that not so?
Well, yeah, but I think the problem is how you use it, right? If you start to bind national identity to expansionist or imperialist or interventionist projects, and to say that this is part of the American project, right? Nation building, spreading democracy, et cetera, these things that have disastrous records, especially in the last 20 years for this country, then you get into trouble, right? And so it becomes not a matter of what the American project, quote unquote, is, but of the way in which that term is used and the way in which whoever happens to have influence over, the military, over the government, tries to make their case about the necessity of doing this in terms that have pretensions toward shoring up national identity. That to me is one of the dangers. And to believe that this stuff is all it's all written in cement, right? It's done. Like we're just fulfilling some pre-written set of requirements, or fulfilling some set of pre-written requirements. One of which is to, enforce the rule of democracy and the preeminence of America on the global stage through the use of the military. I mean, when you start to take that as a given, as it seems that many people would want us to do, that's when things become dangerous. When it becomes something you can't debate anymore, when it becomes something that is kind of like just assumed, that's when you get in trouble. That's the flip side, right, of Reagan's encomium to American diversity, is that the vision he has of the rest of the world is one that is much less diverse, one that is much more uniform and homogenous, and one that is imposed rather than cultivated organically. So, there's that's what I would say about that.
Otto, we used to be a force for anti-imperialism. The documents of 1775 were anti-imperialism, anti-monarchy. We destroyed the Spanish Empire. We destroyed the Second and Third Reich of Germany. We destroyed monarchies. That's what we used to do with our military. But for the past 60 years, we just became our own sort of empire. And it's really expensive. I'm just looking at it from a budgetary issue. I mean, we lost, $1 trillion in Iraq, Afghanistan. I mean, we just can't afford it anymore with our shrinking demographics, our unwillingness to let in immigrants. We can't afford it. We can't do for our own people what we used to be able to do, or at least what it felt like we could do. And I loved America as an anti-imperialist thing. We were great at that, but we're terrible at war. Since for the last 60 years, we haven't won nothing.
What about the Cold War? What about 1989? What about rolling back Soviet influence in Eastern Europe? What about countering the expansionist ambitions of the communist engine coming out of Moscow elsewhere in the world? Was that all a waste of money and time? or is there some world historic merit in the forces of democracy and liberty prevailing, or is that a rhetoric that, since we no longer have the Soviet Union to confront, is an anachronism? I mean, I ask that to all of you guys.
Well, my personal opinion is communism does a great job of destroying itself over time. My opinion is that it is completely, they ended in what, 1989, 1990s, early
1989.
I mean, that's 2 generations have gone by since that. I mean, what is our purpose? I mean, I feel like, sure, we should have a strong Navy to keep the sea lanes open, but like, what are we doing with ourselves? Like, it's just crazy talk to me to be. Sorry, go on.
Glenn, the argument you're making, if I'm not mistaken, was used to justify the Vietnam War and escalation in Vietnam and so on. I don't think that that action was either justified or responsible for the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I think that, I just don't think that, as Robert said, I think it was more through the internal dynamics really that collapse occurred. That's my view. But let me just add one thing. Even if we could afford, leaving aside the question of the cost of military adventurism, I have said that I really love at least the aspirational ideals that are encoded in the founding documents, such as the Bill of Rights. And to bomb a boat in the Pacific, even if it costs nothing compared to our capacity to pay for it, is so contrary, I think, to the ideas of due process. And I just can't stomach it. Even if the cost was not a consideration. To me, it's very un-American, frankly. So some of these activities I find to be un-American.
That's interesting. Can you expand on that? I mean, it's an American action, but it's an un-American impetus to that action.
It's inconsistent with what I see as the best of the American tradition. That's what I mean. You've got these double tap strikes where somebody's clinging onto the side of a boat and there's a blown out of the water, and it's just, I can't, I just, of course it's done by the United States. It's done by the United Military under the orders of the American president, who was elected by the American people. That is all true, but that is a formal sense in which it is an American action. It is also an un-American action in the sense that it's just not consistent with these very, very important and laudable founding principles.
I mean, I agree. It's like, that's what kings do, is they go and kill somebody without trying them. Like that's what, dictators do. It's I agree with Professor Sethi here. It's like, that's un-American to pursue that sort of policy. Like, we're not supposed to do that.
Well, I mean, it's also like, what was this really about? Was this really about national security? Was this really about anti-terrorism that is like drug trafficking now put under the banner of anti-terrorism? No. It's really about just trying to project an image of strength and to like say that this is our domain, and within it we'll do whatever we want. As you say, I don't know what the legalities of due process are in a situation like that, but whatever they are, the idea that this country, can just flagrantly end the lives of people who we don't even really know what was on those boats, et cetera, is something that's antithetical, or ought to be antithetical, to how we conceive of ourselves. But I'll also say that it is not just this administration that is doing this, that targeted drone strikes have been a part of the way that this country does business for a long time now, and it doesn't show any signs of stopping. And Obama was somebody who did it too. And there's a creep toward this, even if we see these kind of like hypertrophic examples of it, in these double tap strikes recently. They are of a piece with other strategies that have been rolled out and have been rolled out under the increasing accumulation of power under the executive branch. This is something that has been a part of what we do for a long time. And because those strikes often take place far from our borders, I think that it's something that most people are able to kind of keep out of their minds a lot more effectively than something that happens right off our coast. And I would just want to point out that this is not something that, although it's disgusting, and although Pete Hegseth's role in it is revolting, and I think he's a kind of malefactor and one of the worst developments of this administration, he's not acting without precedent. That's all I'll say.
In fact, Obama vastly increased the incidence of drone strikes and targeted assassinations relative to his predecessors. And there are people who will make an argument that it was necessary, to protect American interests. I don't subscribe to that. I just don't see it. But Mark is absolutely right. This is not something that's new on the scene.
And I think that if you're gonna, or not you, Rajiv, but if a person is going to be critical of that, which I think we all should be, of these double tap strikes on boats, I think that it's got to be a much broader conversation. And it's an uncomfortable one because what these drone strikes do is give a huge tactical advantage to whoever is using them, because you don't have to risk manpower when you do it. You don't have to put boots on the ground. You don't even have to put a person in an airplane in order to fly over them. You can just send out a little robot and have that do it. When you lower the human cost of war for the offensive side, you get into a situation in which it becomes more and more justifiable or acceptable to use it, because after all, we're not putting our people at risk. And so that's usually the primary objection to war, is we don't want to send our boys off to fight on foreign soil and risk their lives for something that's not worth it. And when you don't have to do that, that part of the cost goes away. And I think that's bad. I think the cost of war in human terms needs to be higher in order to prevent things like this from just colonizing our entire concept of how we do business. Without that, and I know that's kind of a rough thing to say, but I think it's true. It should not be this easy to wage war. It should not be this easy to make these decisions. That's a very bad thing. It's a very dangerous thing. You see what Ukraine is doing with drones, and well, they're in an asymmetrical situation, and their borders are being attacked, and so you understand why they're doing it. This is not that situation. This is not the same.
Okay, I'm not an agent of Pete Hegseth or the United States Defense Establishment, but I'm going to try. I'm defending the country against these malicious incursions. I'm deterring people from engaging in an activity which, in previous administrations, the laxity of our countermeasures had permitted to flourish. Drug trafficking into the country is a problem. Thousands, even millions of lives are at stake. But more than that, the integrity of our borders in question, and the festering malice on our border needs to be confronted vigorously. If there were an international court government structure that would allow for the adjudication of these matters in more felicitous way, I'd avail myself of it, but there is none. And this is the way of the world. And I'm not going to sit by and watch these people infringe upon us without reacting to it. That's it. I don't owe any cosmic justice deference when I'm defending my people.
There's a little bit of bad faith in that argument, isn't there, Glenn? Because if you say, well, there's no international body that can adjudicate these issues, well, this country has stymied at every term the attempt to form such a body, the attempt to give it any kind of power that we would have to, obey. So, yeah, there's no international body that can adjudicate these issues, and that's the way that the U.S. likes it. So you can't say but if there was only another way, because I don't think that that's what people who actually believe the things that you're saying or the side that you're representing here, Glenn, actually think they want it this way, that this is a better way because it allows us to defend our interests. And I would say it allows us to defend certain interests at the expense of others.
I was just going to say, it's the way that we do it, Pop. It's like if I have a drone over a boat, I can follow it until it lands. I can send the police down. I can send the National Guard to arrest everybody and give them due process of law. I don't have to murder them. I mean, we are the United States of America. We don't need to murder them. But we could, if I have an image of it on a boat and I know where it is, I have the resources to go interdict them without killing. And that's what, to me, and I believe Professor Sethi is saying, is it's like, that's un-American. Sure, it might cost us a few more bucks than it is to blow them out of the water. But Americans, we don't play that. We shouldn't play that. We should be, okay, now we captured your ass, and now we can send you to Leavenworth.
Yeah, okay, I want to hear from Rajiv on this, but I don't want this to be the sum and substance of our assessment of America, because there's a lot more at stake.
I'll just add one more thing to these arguments. Glenn, you could probably reduce crime victimization, violent crime victimization, by allowing pedestrian stops and street stops without reasonable articulable suspicion. According to the courts, you need to have articulable suspicion, individualized suspicion, even for a pedestrian stop or a traffic stop. You could abandon that. You could just do it based on, stereotyping. You could abandon probable cause for invasive searches of people's devices or people's homes. If you make the argument that it will make us safer from violent crime, that argument may well be empirically true, but you don't abandon your principles on those grounds. It's just, that's the whole point of principles. They're not subject to this kind of cost-benefit calculation. And I think the same applies to what's going on with these boats. That's what I would say. But I agree also. And Robert, please call me Rajiv. It's embarrassing to be called professor in this company. Yeah.
Don't be embarrassed. Wonderful. Pop allows us to use our names. It's great.
You should hear what he calls me, Rajiv. I mean, you don't want to open this door.
Please, just I mean, you're all very, very distinguished.
So has America been a force for good in the world, all things considered, even if we don't like some of these tactics and some of these actions? I mean, would we have rather seen the Soviet Union prevail in the global competition with the United States after the Second World War? Do we think that the Chinese civilization and model of political economy is a superior way of looking at how to organize society, and its influence to the benefit of mankind would be, it would be good to see its influence. Do we believe in capitalism? Do we believe in the crusade to spread democracy that has animated some of America's even ill-conceived actions and so on? Is America a force for good in the world, all things considered? Why is it that when you look at where people want to go in order to build their lives, if they are forced to leave their homes or if they have the liberty of choosing where to be, they are often choosing to come to the United States of America, notwithstanding the things that we think are wrong with it? Do we have something to celebrate here on the 4th of July? Should I be hanging a flag out in front of my home and allowing it to unfurl and in that way express my love of country, etc.?
Yes, you should be. Yeah, you should be. There's plenty to celebrate. Look, we're Americans, so we're only going to bitch about what's wrong. But, think about the innovation that we've done for this planet. Think about what Silicon Valley has provided. Think about the way we live. Think about air conditioning. God damn, thank God we don't live in France where we ain't got no air conditioning. I mean, we've been a huge force of good. We've been a huge force of good. All of the things we've invented, the fact that we have New York City, the center of global capitalism, that we have built that empire of economic empire. The idea is, though, that we should just be saying, hey, you guys should be like us. We shouldn't be trying to make them like us. Look what happened to the Chinese since, 1998? we're like, hey, there's something to what them Americans do. We're just going to do capitalism with Chinese characteristics. Look at Vietnam. We're just going to do capitalism with Vietnamese characteristics. And then they'll fail on their own with that authoritarian crap. It'll blow up on their face. It always does. So, I mean, we've done such a great job of amalgamating our country. The fact that we as African Americans can sit here and have this conversation with, anybody in this world is just a huge proof of that. And the fact that we as African Americans in that second Civil War in the 1960s created the society we live in today is an amazing and laudable thing. So I'm all for it. I just think we need to, the whole adventurism part of it, we failed at everything we did. It's a failure. The Vietnam War, the Korean War. The Korean War is still going on, by the way, right? They just signed an armistice. They're still at war. So that wasn't a success. Vietnam wasn't a success.
Wait a minute. And South Korea is not a success?
Oh, it's a wonderful success. But
would it be there but for that conflict in the 1950s?
But the war still continues, correct? Is there a peace treaty?
No, there's not. There's not a peace treaty. There's a standoff. There's a confrontation.
Right. We stand there.
It's not an ideal situation, but I'm saying it's better than the alternative if America had not been involved in the securing the South in the first place.
But if we hadn't been involved in there in the first place, the Japanese would have handled that. They only did because we blew up the Japanese. That's the only reason why we were there in the first place. Let's, realistically speaking here, that those power dynamics in Asia.
I think the whole peninsula would look like North Korea if we hadn't been there.
But Glenn, if I could go back to your point about hanging the flag. So my feeling is that I think that a society really needs a kind of sense of shared purpose and a glue that binds people together. The feeling that we are all, pursuing in our own different ways, a mission that we can subscribe to, at least broadly. So if you call that patriotism, then I think patriotism is actually necessary for a well-functioning society. Now, that said, traditional approaches to patriotism, often involve jingoism. They often involve sort of very stale and out-of-date allegiances and rituals. And so, for example, we sometimes treat the founding fathers as saints. I mean, they made brilliant contributions that are world historic. But I mentioned this poem, for example, that was written, "America the Beautiful," the verse that I mentioned. There has to be a patriotism that adjusts to changing circumstances, that recognizes flaws and failures and tries to improve on them. And what I see, generally speaking, is a sort of an anti-patriotism. There's a constituency that sees any kind of praise for the country or expression of love for the country as being somehow suspect because of some of the things that we have described, actually, things that America may have done that have caused great harm. And then on the other side, you have got a certain jingoistic and xenophobic patriotism that sees no flaw in our history and culture. And I think we need something that is more inclusive than that, more enveloping than that. And I think it's possible in America, but I don't see a whole lot of evidence for that kind of patriotism to be what people celebrate. That there doesn't seem to be much of a constituency, let me put it that way, for this different, more nuanced, more inclusive, and more adaptive kind of patriotism. That's my feeling.
Can I tell a quick story?
Sure, Mark.
So back when I was teaching, one day in class, there's this group of girls in the back of class who always sat together. Some of them wore headscarves, some of them didn't. And before class actually started, when everyone was just kind of like, chatting, one of them raised their hand. This is clearly a kind of like question from the group. And they said, "Can I ask you a personal question?" And I was like, "Well, you can ask. I don't know if I'm going to answer it, but you can ask." And They said, "Did you ever defy your parents' wishes when you were younger?" I was like, "Well, yeah, you know, you know, I broke all the rules. I just found a way to do it that wouldn't cause an uproar. I snuck out at night. I did stuff I wasn't supposed to do. Blah blah blah." And then I was like, "Is there a reason you're asking me this?" And they said no. And it's like, okay. And then in office hours later that week, one of the students came to me, and she was like, "I just want to let you know, I may miss a couple classes." And I was like, "What? Does this have anything to do with that question?" And she was like, "Yeah." I don't know if she was born here or Pakistan, but her parents are Pakistani, and they came here. I mean, if you talked to her, you would assume she was American, just not a hint of an accent or anything. And she said, "Well, basically, I've been forced into a marriage with somebody that I don't want to marry, and I have a boyfriend, and he lives in Boston, and basically, and I told my parents, this isn't how we do things here. You brought me here. I'm an American, and this is not how Americans do things." And they basically got me in a room, and they pressured me until I signed the document. And I'm going to go to Boston and stay with my boyfriend for a little bit, and I'm going to try my best to make it back for all my classes. But blah blah. I was like, yeah, of course. Like, you need to do what you need to do. And I found it so sort of hard conversation, and such a hard thing to listen to, because this was like, she's talking about her life. She's talking about the shape of her life going forward. She's talking about the person that she's going to have to, that she's going to spend the rest of her life together. It's one of, if not the most important decision you're going to make in your life. And it's being made for her. And she sees this as this profound violation that's nevertheless coming from a tradition that she clearly feels that she's a part of, but does not define her. She feels that, or felt that, something else defined her. And I don't know why I bring this up now, except to say that you ask if there's things about this country that are like good. I would say, obviously, this is my personal view, but it's better to choose who you marry than have that person chosen for you. Especially if you don't want to do it, if you just straight up don't want to do it. And then, of course, you want to go like, well, why did they come here? They must have had their reasons for coming here. No one made them do it. Ostensibly, I don't know what their story is, except to say that there is a deep tension between the things that bring people here and the things that make them resist certain aspects of life here. And that doesn't just go for immigrants, it goes for people who are born here. I think that that's part of the tension. It's probably part of the tension everywhere, but it has its own particular character here. When she said, "I'm an American girl," she meant that, like, she makes her own decisions, that she has autonomy, that she gets to decide the course of her life. And if that includes making mistakes, they're her mistakes to make. They're not other people's mistakes to make. And, I always think about that when I think about these questions, that how different the question must have been for her than it is for me. So I don't know what I mean to say by bringing that up. It felt relevant.
It's a good story.
It's a good story about Americanism. Like, why do they come if they have to not be Americans or not be Pakistanis?
Well, is it the point that she felt empowered to act on her inclination to go it her own way here, and had the family remained in Pakistan, she probably would not have done so?
Pop, can I ask Rajiv my question?
Yes, you have my permission to ask Rajiv. Now, he speaks for himself, so he may not want to answer. But
Okay. So, Raji, can you explain to me why Paul Krugman is always wrong?
Oh my God, Jesus Christ! He asked this to literally every guest on
Every
the show.
Listen, I'm trying to get to the answer here. Rajiv, you may know, you're an economist. You know, I hang out with Pop. He an economist. Rajiv, why is Paul Krugman always wrong?
You would have to give me a specific example, and then I can tell you.
Thank you. I'm glad you asked. So this week's Paul Krugman quote is, "There is now among us a class of men who pitch and catch with those who have moved into the public space as if the republic were a private yard. They do not govern, they seize." So I guess the first question is that statement correct? And then the next question is...
I'm sorry, the statement was, there's now among us a class of men who
pitch and catch with those who have moved into the public space as if the republic were a private yard. They do not govern, they seize.
I assume he's talking about corruption in the White House and the Trump family business dealings and that kind of thing.
That's a safe assumption.
That's what I would assume. I don't see that as necessarily wrong. It may be debatable, but in terms of at least the recent crypto earnings, stock trades, well ahead of news that was non-public, extraordinary accumulation of wealth that people connected to the presidency have managed to secure. I saw a clip on Fox News recently that talked about Hunter Biden's escapades as being peanuts compared to this. So, is he wrong? I mean, on this count, I mean, I'm sure that Paul is wrong from time to time, but on this count, I don't see it as being obvious at all.
I agree. Actually, I saw a segment on Anderson Cooper last night focusing on meme coin dealings of the Trump administration and of the Trump family business enterprise. It was pretty slimy.
There's an extraordinary article by Isaac Saul, that lays out one after another. And it took enormous amounts of research and digging into sources of ill-gotten gains, and he has cataloged extraordinary levels of corruption. So on this count, I don't see Paul Krugman as being obviously wrong.
Never mind Krugman. I mean, isn't this though so American of P.T. Barnum, our president, the huckster, the showman, the cut corners and sweep under the rug business guy, that he used the office in this way? Is that un-American, or is it quintessentially American? Rajiv.
It's both, Glenn, just like the bombings, indiscriminate bombings and drone strikes and targeted assassinations. I mean, it's American and un-American at the same time, but the checks and balances have all, dissolved. That's the difference, I think. I think there were, the ability to do this kind of thing, out there in the public eye with impunity is something relatively new. Is it American? The attempt to do it, I would say, is American, but so is the infrastructure that constrains it, and that seems to have dissolved for the time being.
Well, two things. One, Nikita pointed out that may or may not have been a Paul Krugman quote. That's what AI gave me, so let me make sure that's 100% clear off the bat. But my second point that I want to throw at you is that what did the Trump family seize with the meme coin? They sold a product like steaks or Make America Great hats, that a Make America Great hat loses value the moment it's put on someone's head. Why doesn't a meme coin or a steak that he sells or a bottle of wine that he sells as soon as you drink it is gone? What is the difference? Did he seize the U.S. Naval Yard and say this now belongs to Ivanka? So I'm going to say it's wrong.
I gather that the money that he's making is coming from fees that they are collecting on transactions in the coin. But it's something that would need to be researched further. I'm not exactly sure.
It's an excellent question, though. It's an excellent question. Who's losing? Yeah, who's losing by the fact that a certain group of people is getting extraordinarily rich? And the answer is not obvious, but the answer is there. The question, one really has to look at what the economy in the aggregate is producing. Are we producing so much more that some subset of us can become fabulously wealthy without anybody else losing out? And that's not what's happening over here. Our GDP growth is not, shot up. When it's a redistribution of wealth, and one of the reasons why it's really hard to stop, actually, is that the losers are not evident. They're not transparent, but they are there. They have to be there by the adding up constraint. We're not producing more. So if some people are appropriating more of what we are producing, there are others getting less.
Rajiv, how different is the meme coin thing from tulips in Holland back in the day?
So it's similar in one respect. If a meme coin rises in value and then collapses, then the wealth gains are paper gains that eventually disappear. And that's what happened with the tulips. With the tulips, they went up in price to absurd, extraordinary levels, and then collapsed. So anybody who made money on that lost it. Of course, they could have cashed out before the crash and shifted the losses onto somebody else and so on. And this happens very much with meme coins also. If you can get out of your position before the crash, then the losses are not, the losses are not incurred by those who made the gains. And in that case, it's not a wash. So even in the case of the tulips, so Kindleberger's book, Manias, Panics, and Crashes, talks about this, and there are other sources as well. But I don't think that the people who made money on the rise were the same who lost it on the fall. So there's a hot potato effect where you're just sort of handing off these things to other people, and sometimes the one gets left holding the bag at the end is the one who loses. And those are not the same people who gained on the way out.
I have a question about this, actually. So there's one idea that the meme coin is just a kind of like for the buyer a form of investment in this commodity, but there's also a question of using large meme coin or large Trump coin purchases to gain influence within the administration, and I think that is one of the major concerns, that people who hold a lot of this coin are being given access, that there are people who hold a lot of this coin that have business before the government, and it's being used as a kind of either a proxy in itself to kind of, wave your hand and say, like, hey man, like, I'm invested in you. I've essentially donated money to you by virtue of the transaction fees that you're collecting on this, or as an entree to a conversation with somebody within the administration. Isn't that kind of more traditional corruption? Isn't this a kind of backdoor to that?
I think that's right. I actually think it's a way of laundering your corrupt bribe money. So it's not a bag full of cash handed under the desk. It's an above-board transaction, which it can be known in advance you will benefit from, and I know that you will benefit from it, and therefore it's a kind of bribe, but undercover. Do you disagree, Rajiv?
No. Actually, I agree, and in that sense, it's very different from the tulip bubble. So to the extent that you're willing to incur losses on the meme coin purchases in order to wield influence and get receive gains elsewhere, you come out ahead on net, but you make the losses on the meme coin. So that's right. That's that. Then for that, the tulip analogy fails. But that is part of what's going on. Yeah.
I mean, there's also like another dynamic, which I think we would like to see right now. Like, let's say that the idea that it's being used as a kind of avenue toward bribery, essentially. Now, when Trump is going to leave office, one would assume that the value of that thing is going to collapse, and it will be a de facto rug pull, which is when someone who creates a coin and it's kind of bolstered by their personality or whatever, and they hold a lot of it. They'll drum up a lot of publicity for it, and then people will start trading it, and then they, as the primary investor in the meme coin, will sell off their holdings all at once and disinvest. And then once it becomes clear that the primary holder is out, the value collapses, and they've made off with the bag, and everybody else is left holding this worthless thing. And I'm wondering if this is what we're going to see at the end, as a kind of flurry of attempts to sell off this coin near the end of the administration before he leaves office, and it becomes functionally worthless for those who want to use it not for its own value, but for the access it grants them.
But if it's anticipated that it will become worthless, it already is worthless.
Well, not as long as it still gets you access. The question is when the access gets cut off.
Oh, I see. You're assuming the supply of buyers is really the bribe activity undercover.
Let's assume that.
Yeah, but Mark, Mark, Glenn's argument is still valid in the following sense. If you believe that it's going to crash, next week, you want to take a short position in it, and which is not difficult to do now. What you want to do is to sell it now. It's going to crash. You buy it back. You borrow, sell, buy back. So really, Glenn's argument is that a predictable crash in any kind of financial asset is just simply not possible, because you're going to crash it. A little bit earlier, and a little bit before that, and so on and so forth. But there's if there's uncertainty about when it's going to crash, I don't think that you can be certain that it's going to crash once you have a change of administration. You might be aware that it's going to crash at some point before that, but if there's uncertainty, you might hold on. And there are interesting mathematical models that show that you can sustain a bubble in those kind of situations. But Glenn's argument doesn't fit. If you believe that the access is going to go away next week and it's going to crash next week, there's money to be made by selling that asset short today. So it can't be that predictable.
We have a question from the chat that I want to make sure that we get to. This is from Austin Ball, who is a frequent commenter. Hi, Austin. Austin says, it seems like a common point of argument is that suspension of principles to protect a greater good is necessary in the world, given how messy reality is and how willing other global actors seem to be to do so. The history of U.S. foreign policy during the Cold War, CIA actions in various places and wars, etc., is evidence of this. Is it the case that some innocents must die as a matter of tragic necessity? That's Austin Ball.
I think the issue of whether innocents must die, as a result of our choices, is different from whether or not those choices are principled or not. You can have principled actions that are consistent with our norms, our creed, that will have effects on people who don't deserve it. For example, you can have people who are incarcerated because they're wrongly convicted, but they're convicted based on a process that we subscribe to, a jury trial or adversarial system, where defense and prosecuting attorneys are having at it with each other. Likewise, we can have innocent people. Likewise, you can have guilty people who are released. So I think it's a different question. I think the question of whether or not people suffer consequences when they don't deserve it, or fail to be held to account when they do deserve it, that's an outcome of the fact that our consistent application of principles is not perfect. There's uncertainty between our choices and the outcomes that it's going to generate. And one can still pursue our actions in a principled way while recognizing that. So just the fact that there are innocent people who are incarcerated and there are guilty people who fail to be held to account doesn't necessarily mean that our judicial processes are inconsistent with our principles. I don't know if that really addresses the point. I'm trying to separate the.
I think the wrinkle. I mean, the wrinkle in that is that you're talking about a domestic, process that is rigorously enforced and has responsibility for its enforcement dispersed across the entire system. So there's no one person who is in charge of making sure that laws are enforced and that judges decide impartially, et cetera, et cetera. That's something that's why we have systems of appeals and things like that. But we're talking, the question is much more directed toward foreign policy, in which the responsibility lies almost entirely, or the decision-making process lies almost entirely within a single branch of government. And the principles are much more notional than they are within the legal system.
The example I think of is motivated by Tom Schelling's reflections on the problem of nuclear deterrence. So you have your missiles aimed at their missiles are aimed at your missiles. But some of your missiles are aimed at their population centers on the theory that if they were to attack and expend their missiles so there's nothing there to hit anymore, you have to have a credible counter response to that in order for them to be deterred from attacking in the first place. But then suppose they do attack. Now, are you going to come and follow through on your threat? Well, of course, this doesn't just happen once. This is a serial dynamic, and your failure to follow through on your threat invites further attack. The people who are under your missiles in those civilian population centers are innocent. They just happen to be in the wrong place. The logic of deterrence requires you to commit yourself to killing innocent people. So I think also that's the tragic necessity of the situation of conflict and opposition in the first place. And moreover, maintenance of the peace depends upon this whole elaboration. So, yes,
well, yeah,
it's a necessity.
That's the irony, though, right? Because the thing that keeps that system of deterrence in place is that nobody hurts anybody, right? That on the one hand, you're turning your entire population into human shields. But so is the other guy. And so you have the same risks on the table. But when Austin is talking about like CIA meddling in foreign places and assassinations and things like that, right? Or wars that end up steamrolling through, conventional wars that end up steamrolling through population centers in which people are just living their lives, and oops, like there's a terrorist cell, somewhere nearby. And so a lot of them get killed as quote unquote collateral damage. Now, we want to say killing innocents is not something that we want to do. It's not something that we do as a goal. It's a profound violation of international law and profoundly immoral to kill an unarmed civilian, much less many. But this is something that happens in the course of conventional warfare. Do we violate? Is it necessary to violate principle in the course of going about, business in order to maintain a larger sphere of stability? I think that's something like the question. Where, in the situation you described, Glenn, the whole point is that there's a reason you don't hurt the other person's civilian population, because it's going to come back on you immediately.
Mark, I think that this kind of argument is often made to justify actions where somebody else's innocent civilians do not have their lives valued to the same degree as our innocent civilians. Suppose that you are willing to take an action. There may be situations, there certainly may be situations where you have to take an action that is going to cause death and destruction for innocent civilians that we consider to be part of our own group, fellow Americans, let's say. And, we tend to be much more willing to subject innocent civilians elsewhere to the death and destruction that we would not be willing to countenance if it was our own innocent civilians. So that's where the departure from principles takes place. Not the fact that sometimes innocent civilians are going to be hurt, but the fact that, we have dehumanized or at least discounted the value of the life of people, who are not our folks. And that's where we started with the Declaration of Independence, and the insistence there is just something that means a lot to me, is the word all, right? It's not just all Americans are created equal. All of us are created equal. I mean, if one treats innocent civilians, that are in some other corner of the world as less valued as those who are in our own neighborhood, that to me is going against the sentiment in the Declaration of Independence.
That's the problem in Gaza, isn't it? The
Yes,
disproportionality. I mean, October 7th, 2023 happened. It was a horrific thing that happened. It needed to be responded to. 100-1? Does that not convey a sense of the relative valuation of civilian life that is out of line with our moral principle?
I think there's no question that people in military conflict value the life of innocents less when those innocents are members of some other society. I think that is almost always the case. And yes, I think it's also the case in Gaza. And you can have, there are lots of examples of statements that suggest this kind of dehumanization. But to me, it's clearly in evidence, yes.
Pop, I have a 4th of July question for you.
Okay.
When I was a kid, I grew up in a Black Panther household. And before we could eat a hot dog or light a firework, my dad made us declaim the Frederick Douglass speech, what is the 4th of July to a slave? And we were programmed as children. And in fact, I recall at some point he made us change the word slave to black man. That was a pretty impactful thing for me because as a child, we had to look at the 4th of July holiday through 2 different lights based on my parents' politics. One is that was for them, not us. The 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, but I must mourn, was the Frederick Douglass quote that he would, pat us on the back with before the hot dogs went on the grill. I just don't know. I feel like today, if I had grandchildren, I wouldn't be raising them with that today. What are your feelings on that? And then secondarily, what are your feelings? How is it different for us as ADOS, American descendants of slaves, versus brown folks like Rajiv or West Indians or other Black and brown people here?
Rajiv's going to have to go soon, so and I want to hear his response to this. I think a couple of things. That was 1852, if I'm not mistaken, that speech of Frederick Douglass. Slavery, the Dred Scott decision had not yet been handed down. The Civil War was still more than a decade off before its conclusion. The Emancipation Proclamation, et cetera, had yet to be rendered. I think Douglass was, of course, right to be critical and skeptical about the celebration of the founding of the country, given that the condition of his people in bondage persisted. But the Constitution, in a way, was vindicated by the unfolding of the Civil War, the Emancipation, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and so on. The Republic, in a way, was refounded. And we have the fitful, incomplete, long duration of assimilation of the freedmen, of the formerly enslaved people, into the body politic, which has been consummated, in effect, with the Civil Rights Revolution in the 1960s, and on to that culminating in the election of Barack Obama as president and all that. No, it's not perfect. Yes, there's still some issues, but the overall arc of that story is a celebration of the possibilities of liberation and freedom implicit in the American founding, I think. So I think to be a Negro, a Black man, an African American in the 21st century and looking at this republic, there's much that can be celebrated. I think that overall story is a remarkable celebration of freedom in its fullness. So I think that. I also think we African Americans are not, we're like Americans. We're like natives of the soil practically. We're not immigrants. We don't have any home other than this home. Why not embrace it and make it a better place?
Rajiv, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Glenn, as Glenn said, I have to leave in a bit. My wife is giving me a hard time. We have to go get dinner. It's around 8:30, but this is such an important question. I think, Glenn, broadly speaking, I think, Frederick Douglass's speech was right for its time. It was brilliantly expressed. I think that there have been a lot of developments since then that would cause Frederick Douglass to believe that the country is in a very different place. That said, suppose that somebody were to make a speech like that, leave aside the question of race or ethnicity or gender or any particular way in which we divide each other. But suppose that somebody were to say that, look, you have these principles and I am not fully included in your project. That may or may not be true, but I think that deserves a hearing. There may be folks who feel that they're excluded, perhaps not in the way, to the extraordinary extent that Douglass, and his fellow Americans were excluded in his time. But there may be ways of there may be ways in which, again, going back to this God mend thine every flaw line, your point, if I understand it correctly, Glenn, is that Douglass very powerfully and beautifully, eloquently identified deep flaws in American society, and as you put it, as you said, many of those flaws have been fixed and corrected. That doesn't mean they don't still exist. People who don't have the full spectrum of rights, or that don't feel legitimately part of the American project. And if somebody makes that kind of case, I think they ought to be given a hearing. So I don't think we've reached any kind of terminal point or kumbaya moment or nirvana. Let me just put it that way. I think that there are a lot of people who express grievances, and to me they seem trivial and exaggerated. But there will be others who express grievances that are really quite legitimate, and we ought to listen. So that's how I would respond. But yeah.
Let me thank you, Rajiv, for joining us. I don't know, I didn't mean to preempt you, Robert, but your wife is waiting in the wings, and it's, 8:30 where you guys are? It's time to get dinner, even in Paris.
It's 8:30, and we're not going to be able to get food if we don't leave right away. So I'm going to take my leave, but it was a pleasure to join you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rajiv.
Thank you. I hope you get ice water, brother. Okay. I have a question for Mark Pop. And it's actually you and Mark, but you guys are PhD nerds and stuff. So, how much of this literature thing about America and what America is comes from the novels of Horatio Alger and that way of looking, that plucky story from Alger that he used over and over again?
No, I think that's it's an exemplification of something that was already present. It's, you can look to Franklin as the kind of first major identifiable American you to do that. But of course, Franklin was not inventing this idea of like the self-made man. He was kind of promoting it. And Alger was just a figure who turned that into kind of like childhood parables about that. I mean, we see this perpetuated on and on and on and on. I think you probably have to go pretty far back, probably far back before the founding of America, to kind of identify the roots of those kinds of things. And by the way, this is something that was a subject of the exchange that Glenn and I had. When was it? A couple months ago? A month ago? I have no idea.
About minstrelsy?
Yes, exactly. Was the place of the kind of Franklinian American and the respectable behaviors and the concept of respectability and its place in the kind of racial formation in the US. And we looked at kind of two examples, and one was minstrelsy and the other was respectability politics in their contemporary iteration. So I would say, yeah, I mean, like he's certainly a kind of place that people point to, but he's didn't really invent it. He gave it a kind of compelling narrative form that was very popular.
And this is a success? It's a celebration and worship of
it's kind of up by your bootstraps kind of mentality, right? The sort of poor waif who's got nothing learns that through hard work and discipline and self-denial, prudence, continence, etc., one can achieve anything in the United States. And that's the kind of basic story that he told over and over in his...
Okay, so that I can see would be a fuel for a certain line of thinking in the popular imagination, a certain narrative. But what about in the literary imagination? Has the Horatio Alger corpus influenced, I don't know, Faulkner or Eugene O'Neill or Toni Morrison or...
Well, okay, two things I would say. One is no.
I didn't think so.
Because, he's writing essentially children's stories or what we would call today young adult literature.
Norman Podhoretz making it?
I think he meant something different. I don't think that conniving and backstabbing was part of the Alger mentality. But I guess to take the question a little bit more seriously, there's a really great idiosyncratic book by D.H. Lawrence called Studies in American Literature. And it begins with the premise that American literature up to that point in the early 20th century is basically children's literature. It's literature for young boys. It's adventure stories that are dressed up in one way or another. And there are very few places you could point to that would suggest the same kind of complexity as European, Russian literature or any other kind of major national literature up to that point. So the other thing to say is that, well, no, not directly, but certainly that is probably, especially for Faulkner, the kind of thing that he may well have read when he was a young boy. As to whether you can see its traces, I mean, I guess if you could read Absalom as a kind of fucked up Horatio Alger story, because it's about the foundation of this family in the South, and literally one of the kind of, gosh, it's been a long time since I've read that book, but I recall one of the many incredible scenes that he paints is, this guy working naked in the mud alongside his slaves to sort of like build his plantation. So, the story of the South and the place of labor and self-making, and that is one that certainly complicates the Horatio Alger myth, doesn't it? And that's something for sure you can see in our literature by quote-unquote serious authors.
Is it in African American literature, that same story? Like when I think of African American literature, I think of Baldwin and I think of Toni Morrison and stuff, but there is nothing like that in my understanding in our culture. Am I right on this? Are we missing something, Pop, about America, like as a people?
I'll let Mark respond to that.
Well, I think if you look at, I mean, for me, the novel was the thing. And if you look at the earliest African-American novels, well, clearly not, because there's this little thing that's kind of interfering with the sort of myth of self-making if you're Black in this country in the 19th century. One of the more interesting is one of the earliest African-American novels there are, and it was not published in the US. They couldn't find a US publisher for, I think, reasons that are obvious, is a great book called The Garys and Their Friends. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the author's name. Frank Webb. By Frank Webb, which tells the story of this, what you would call today like a kind of upper middle class Black family in an upper middle class Black neighborhood, and about their, first of all, the kind of like uneasy coexistence of that community with, the local whites. And it culminates in this, or it involves a kind of race riot in which, of course, we're meant to understand that it doesn't matter how successful this family is, and the family's got a big portrait of Toussaint Louverture, like in their living room, and they are Black, right? And it's so interesting how deeply that dynamic is ingrained. One that does not really involve slavery directly, but how deeply that dynamic, right? It doesn't matter how much you accrue. Don't forget, you're still Black, right? It doesn't matter how materially successful you are. How far back it goes in the literature, and of course, if you're only talking about traditional forms like poetry and the novel and things like that, you're not there aren't a ton of works by African Americans deep or early in the 19th century for obvious reasons. But the ones that do are quite interesting. The work they did produce is quite interesting insofar as look at that. I mean, I forget when exactly that novel was written, but I believe it predates the Civil War, and it's fascinating how far back it goes.
Pop, do we as African Americans have an issue with celebrating July 4th, and that's why we got Juneteenth?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, that's it. It's their July 4th. It's the July 4th they can believe in. I think that's a mistake, actually. Not that Juneteenth should be rescinded as a holiday. It's a fait accompli. But the idea that we should be reticent to embrace our Americanness, and we need a counterpoint. And I've said why I think that. I've already said why I think that. But I want to answer with a different kind of question, which is America a Christian nation? Is it a white nation? Well, no, it's not. It's a matter of demographic description. A Christian nation, there are many non-Christians. And it's obviously not a white nation. There are many people of color. But there is a strand in contemporary political commentary which talks a lot about the Christian and European origins of the United States. And I wonder how you guys feel about that. Rajiv alluded to this when he remarked about Marco Rubio's speech in Munich, which I thought was extraordinary in its assertion that America is a European nation. We must not be enemies, he says to the Europeans, contra what J.D. Vance had said just the year prior to that. We must not be enemies. We're cousins. We are with you a part of the same civilization. And this kind of talk about Christian civilization, about European civilization in the context of America is remarkable. And I just wonder what you, Rob, and you, Mark, think about it.
Well, Nick, can you fact check me on this before I go into a deep hole? But I think the largest ethnic group in the United States are Germans. And that they make up the actual, if you break it out into all the different groups, I believe it's the Germans that represent the largest amount of people here in the United States. And those folks are largely Protestant and they're largely white. And I think that no matter how we look at it, we live in a Prussian light country, a light Prussian country. So if we're sitting here saying, oh, well, who are we? Well, we're mostly Germans. That's who we are. According, Nick just responded, yes. So there's 40 million people report German ancestry in this country. So, yeah, we are a Christian white country. We're Prussian light. Mark, your thoughts?
Historically and demographically, but I want to know like what the connection is between that demographic claim and the actual substance of what it means to have a culture. We can start doing head counts and we can make claims about what American culture is based on that, but that doesn't really tell us anything about what generates the texture of the thing that we consider. Now, we can say like, and people often like to play this game, like something will happen and we'll go like, oh, that's so American, right? Oh, that's such an American thing to do. Oh, that's such an American thing to say. There are such things as American attitudes or American ways of being. American cultural creations, right? We like to point to the good ones like jazz and go like, yeah, we did that. Like, hell yeah, we did that. Why? Because it's awesome. And because it's the, this incredible, expression, this incredibly complex and deep expression of whatever. It's American, right? And importantly, it is African American in its origins. And so we can't, when we're talking about this stuff, we can't just be like, well, there's a lot of like people of German descent who are, if not themselves Protestants, then the descendants of Protestants. We can't just then, by that fact, say like, okay, well, we're a Christian Protestant nation. Yeah, sure, head count, but not what makes an American a distinct thing.
Well,
otherwise we just be German.
Well, let me throw this at you, and Pop. We use the Prussian public school system, and I believe that's where all of the reading of the flag, the Pledge of Allegiance, we're supposed to learn civics there, and we use the Prussian model for public education. So I think that's why it's more outside powerful than just a head count or anything like that.
Yeah, but is there something inherently racial about that? Or is it just a system? I mean, are we going to, like, is there, Isaac Newton,
I don't know if I was
laws of
making
gravitation, is there something English about gravity? Like, I don't think so.
I just think that, I think someone of African American descent, when I look at the things that I hold dear in my culture, which is Friday night barbecue, good music, great storytelling, et cetera, and I look at the Prussians, what their values are a little different. Like they eat terrible food. Do you know what I mean? Like they believe in science and atoms and math.
Wait, there aren't Prussians anymore.
Yeah, they're not Prussians. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, they're Germans. I mean, that's what we call them now. But
there's a kind of deterministic essentialism that you're embedding on this thing. That they're not Germans after 2, 3, or 4 generations in the Western Hemisphere.
So Eisenhower wasn't German?
Well, he wasn't German in the way in which he would have been if he had been speaking German and living in Berlin.
Is Trump German?
No.
No, I would say.
You think he's fully American?
He's quintessentially American.
If you can be, if there is such a thing as an American, Trump is that.
I think immigration is what makes this country very unique. And I think immigration is an invitation to transformation. People don't stay the same. And when they start bumping into each other from their various corners of the world with their different cultural orientations, they create something new. And certainly that's the case with respect to African Americans in the context of the creation of a uniquely American culture, whether it be music or art or literature or whatever.
I mean, my great-grandmother on my father's side was born in 1906 in Austria. She died when I was 13, so I knew her. I saw her all the time and heard her talk. She spoke German, Yiddish, and English. And I remember her cooking, and I remember, the way she played with us and all of this stuff. She's an incredible cook, blah, 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 blah. I don't speak German. I don't speak Yiddish. I don't know, because I was too stupid to ask when I was that age, what her life was really like before she came over to the US. But I can guarantee you it was not a lot like mine. Now, is she an important part of my lineage? Absolutely. Do I think about her all the time when I think about what I'm doing? Absolutely. I'm not defined in any way that I could put my finger on, or that is probably significant by whatever life she left behind when she came over here. And I think that is probably true of many, 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 many people in this country who are a couple few generations removed from immigration. And that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. So I have a little bit of trouble putting so much emphasis on, now, of course, you can dial it up and dial it back, right? Some people choose to reconnect to those roots intentionally. But the point is that it's an intentional choice. It's not organic. It's not something they remember from their childhood. It doesn't kind of get into their blood the way it does, the way that the things do that you do when you're a child, just because that's what you're taught to do and that's what everybody else is doing. It's a choice to go back. And that itself is probably likewise a feature of, American immigrant and multi-generational immigrant identity as well. The decision to try to reconnect with something that is distant and that you have no firsthand experience of.
Should we fear the consequences of immigration the way that some people on the right seem to do? They don't want things to change. It's not a recognizable country anymore, this sentiment, especially you see in Europe, where they're being inundated with Muslim and other foreigners who are changing the way London looks and sounds, the way Amsterdam looks and sounds. I'm struck watching the World Cup at how racially diverse the teams being fielded by some, what I thought was Nordic-like European countries have become. And I'm just wondering whether, I think of Tucker Carlson here. I think we have a clip of him. I don't know if we have time to play it. We could play it, Nick. You got me calling him Nick.
The United States is based on a universalist principle. It is famously a country built on ideas. Now, whether that works or not is an open question. It's not working right now. The countries that are working are ethno-states, actually. China's an ethno-state. It's Han Chinese. It's a Han Chinese state. Japan is a Japanese country. Well, we don't have that, okay? And we're never going to have it at this point. So whether or not it was a good idea to build our national identity on a creed, whether it's a good idea to be a creedal country or not, it is. And there's no obvious solution to it at this point. And so if we're going to continue this experiment, and whether that works, you have to demand that everybody's all in on something that unites every person in the country. And it can't just be gay marriage. That's not enough. It's not enough to say we're a pro-LGBTQ plus, and then, of course, not define it. But your openness to other people's weird sex lives is not a unifying national principle. Sorry, that's weak sauce. We can't have a religion because it's religiously diverse and the Constitution prohibits it. At this point, we can't have a race, okay? Because there are just too many different races. Maybe that would have worked, but at this point, it's not going to work. And the only way to get there is through violence, and no. So realistically, not on Twitter, but like in real life, what do we do?
I don't know, that N-word is crazy. Like you say,
it sounds better when you say that nigga is crazy.
Just it's respect to the channel, boss. It's just respect for the channel. You know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
But
why is it crazy?
I mean, the reason why he's crazy is because I can get behind LGBTQAIBCD because it's about liberty. It's that, and that is a unifying American thing. It's about liberty, that they have the right to do whatever that they feel is who they are and what makes them happy, as long as it doesn't infringe on my right to do the same. That's the basic point of liberty and justice for all, right there. So of course I can get behind that, and that just seems ridiculous.
Yeah, I have to confess, I don't understand. I don't understand because there's this search for a definition, some kind of combination of words that's going to, nail down what it is to be American, and then you can parse those who fit the definition and those who don't. And how would you enforce such a definition? How would you get people on board with such a definition? There's such a diversity of people in this country who've been here for so long, and some of them for not so long, who bear all the markers of the things that, if you live in a neighborhood where there's lots of different kinds of people, and if you talk to those lots of different kinds of people on any kind of regular basis, you see how quickly and how easily it is to just have a regular conversation without really being bothered by any of these details or anybody's background or anything. And I mean, I think, isn't that what it really comes down to? We have these kind of abstractions that kind of govern our conversations about social cohesion, but social cohesion doesn't happen, at a level of abstraction. It happens in the concrete interactions between people who speak to each other and who know each other, and it ramifies out and out and out and out and out through the sort of web of social relations that kind of link everybody together. That's what social cohesion is. It's not about like whose kind of like doctrinal beliefs are compatible, right? It's about, can you get along with the person who's living on either side of you? That's what it's about. I don't get what he's talking about.
Well, here I'm going to try. I don't think I agree with what he's talking about, but I may get it. He's saying the only states that work are ethno-states. Now, I think that you could challenge that. China is an ethno-state. Is it because it's an ethno-state that China is as effective as it has been in the last half century in developing its potential as an economy and as a force in global affairs? Is it because it was an ethno-state? And he seems to be saying they all agree about something. They have a baseline of common vision and definition, which allows them to work more effectively together cooperatively. And I just don't know if that's true. But he seems to be calling for that. He wants it to be, he says, reluctantly, the race homogeneity didn't work. Sounds like he regrets that. Too bad. Really? I mean, as a descendant of slaves, I'm afraid I can't agree. It's a Christian country as well. I mean, no, not universally so, but fundamentally so. And we moved away from that. And that's why I think the swipe at gay marriage is meant to say postmodern, woke abandonment of our Christian moral grounding on behalf of latter-day enthusiasms is not a substitute for the real thing. That's what I think he's saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just right there, like the reason why China's successful is because he's trying to say the reason why China's successful is because they're Chinese, and that there's something about being just Chinese that makes them successful, and it's not true. I mean, it's just obviously not true. The reason why we are successful with only 400 million population, creating the economy that we have with the power behind it, is because of our liberties, because of our mixture of people and stuff. That's the real proof in the pudding is right there. United States as a mixture of cultures, as a non-ethno state, is way more successful than any other place on the country, both economically and lifestyle and everything else. So he's just crazy, Pop. The guy's crazy.
I can imagine somebody from China listening to that and just laughing and being like, you don't have a culture. You're fucking babies. We've been around for 5,000 years, man. Like, you just got here. Like, you don't know what you are. You're not.
Listen, okay, then I got the blues.
When they got millennia.
I'm saying that. I'm not saying that as a dig. I'm just saying, think about the time scales we're talking about here. Like, we're like, we are a modern invention.
And we dope and we do dope shit. There's no question about it. Like,
and these other places that he's talking about, these heterogeneous societies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, like, even the English laugh at us because when we talk about things being old. There's nothing in your country that's old. Like, nothing's old. You got rid of everything that was old in your country. You conquered and destroyed the parts of your country that were actually old. The things that you have now they're all brand new.
Look, the Scottish invaded Boston for the World Cup a couple weeks ago, and we Bostonians fell in love with them, and they fell in love with us, and it was a great time. Blah 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 blah. But I guarantee you that every one of them is wishing they had ice in their glass and air conditioning when they went home. That I can say for 100% surety on it. And frankly, we so far outdo the ethno-states. It's just a ridiculous comparison. Like, name an ethno-state that does anything better than we do.
China builds high-speed rail. They can stand up a city of 10 million in a decade. And then they don't have an environmental protection agency. They don't have a plaintiff's bar of liability suits that make provision of healthcare.
Right. Well, the Chinese
don't have NIMBY. They don't have NIMBY where you can't build anything because of the kind of stuff that Mark Dunkelman, whom I've had as a guest on the show, talks about. Political influence and so on. I mean,
but let's just look at it. Where did they get the technology from the high-speed rail? Where'd they get? They came up with the high-speed rail. That was their idea.
Well, where's our high-speed rail? Like, it's not. If you're implying that we invented it, we didn't do shit with it.
We invented electric cars. They far exceeded us in manufacturing them and using capitalist systems to make the cost affordable and all that other stuff. But the idea still came from us. Certainly the Western world.
Okay, well, if you have an idea and you don't use it, is it yours? I mean,
Well, I'm just saying, but there's no, what ethno-state does anything better than we do?
Well, look, this is the thing, as someone who rides the subway most days, and has also ridden mass transit in other countries, there is no comparison. New York has the best public transit system in the country, and it is ridiculous to compare it to any other nation with a developed mass transit system. This is much worse. It's much worse. And we're the best that we can do, apparently. And I don't like this idea that, like, well, because we invented it or we did it or blah, 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 like, it's ours and we must be better. Like, there are better implementations of the things that we can lay claim to. Like, and the idea that there's some kind of, like, reason to be proud of something that we could have at some point and hopefully in the future taken advantage of, but we haven't done it. Like,
but why haven't we done it? Let's talk about that. Why is there NIMBY? Why haven't we done it? Because we don't want to infringe on other people's liberties and other people's way of getting along and being in a position to enjoy private, contemplative, to have a life. That's why NIMBY exists, is because if you were going to inflict a skyscraper on a small neighborhood, that's going to affect their lives. So they have the right in America to stand up and say, hey, we don't want your skyscraper here.
Okay, so as a place that has a lot of skyscrapers and a lot of new...
cost of liberty. Liberty has a cost. You can't just roll over the people in a society like ours. And that does cause problems like, why don't we have, great high-speed rail or great public transportation? Because somebody's going to say, hey, no, I don't want you to put a T station over here because that's going to affect my business, my way of life, or whatever. So we have to move a little slower than dictatorships do.
If you want to look at the dire state of rail travel in the United States as a gold star for this country and as a virtue, then have at it.
Yeah, but I drive my hybrid electric car and I have a great time on our highways.
There are costs and benefits, the cost of liberty, and sometimes those costs can be pretty great. So liberty is not everything.
It's got its downsides, Bob.
We have a question from M.A. Anderson in the chat. M.A. Anderson says, what is an American? When you travel, other people know you are American. What is that?
I know.
You can overhear their conversations when they're sitting at dinner and they're speaking in English with American intonations.
And it's easier to overhear them because those conversations are really loud.
Yeah, they're loud.
But we just don't give a fuck. That's what it is. We're just like, I love going to Italy.
It's the kind of libertarian sense of entitlement that Rob just got through giving voice to.
Exactly. We don't care. You're foreigners. That's how we look at them.
So you go to Italy and you're like, what are all these foreigners
exactly.
doing here?
Like, this place would be nice if there weren't so many foreigners.
Putting ketchup on your steak.
Oh, delicious, though. In the way, if you have a really bad steak, put ketchup on it. If you got a bad steak, trust me, if it's too tough, put some ketchup.
We've defaulted to self-parody at this point. I mean,
it's the end of the stream. We're having a little fun, Mark. I had a whole thing on Raisin in the Sun that I wanted Pop to react to, but we don't have time.
Raisin in the Sun?
Yes, brother.
Walter Lee Younger?
Yes. I mean, I think that's what it all, for us people, there's so much packed into that. Oh, no, we're going to marry. What's the dream? To marry an African prince. What's the dream? To own a business in the neighborhood. Big Mama is always right. Everybody else is wrong. What's the dream? Live with white folks. I think that's Raisin in the Sun has turned into this giant thing in my mind about who we are today, and I'm trying to wrestle with it.
Okay, that's an interesting hypothesis. You know, I saw P. Diddy play Walter Lee Younger on Broadway in a production of Raisin in the Sun 15 years ago.
How'd he do?
Not bad. Not great. And I'm not a theater guy, but I thought it was much better than I would have imagined.
Right?
Felicia Rashad was the mother. She was fantastic.
He was supported by Felicia Rashad. Like, it's like, geez, like even Mark could have played lead. if he had Felicia there, because she would say, "I believe that's." There he is. And then we, the audience, would accept it because Felicia agreed. And we'd be like, there, Mark is playing the part of Walter Lee Younger.
I mean, God willing, someday in this country, I will be allowed to finally fulfill my destiny as a racially transcendent American of doing something I really should not be doing.
Yeah. Mark, what would Charles Chestnut say about today and the 4th of July?
Oh, geez, I don't know. It's hard to say because you want to ask. I mean, we don't want to go too far over time, but it's hard because Charles Chestnut died in a kind of state of despair, and that wasn't just because his personal finances had been destroyed. And here I'll put in a plug for. Do I have it? Oh, it's upstairs. Put in a plug for my my friend Tess Chikalakal's biography of Chestnut. A Matter of Complexion, which is a really great biography. The first modern.
Do you want to arrange to talk with her at the Glenn Show about that book?
We could definitely do that. And Rob, I know you would have a lot of questions. I'm sure she'd be happy to do it for sure.
That's the guy who I think I am.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, we should set something up with Tess. I'll shoot her an email. But anyway, he kind of died in a state of despair because the Harlem Renaissance had more or less, or what became the Harlem Renaissance was more or less kind of, destroying the legacy of the things that he thought were valuable. He was a late Victorian bourgeois who had an incredible life story, but did not really fit into the shape of what became, Black literature and culture by the time that he died. I don't. So it's hard to say what he would have thought of today. And I'm not really the person who's equipped to do that. But Tess is, and so maybe we should have her on the show.
Yeah, I'm for that. I want to thank you guys for a stimulating discussion. Rob, did I cut you off? We are over time.
No, we're good, Pop. We're good.
Okay. Good to see you. Good to see you, Mark.
Indeed,
and
as
I
always.
think it was a productive discussion. Thanks to Nikita for his provocation at the start. What to a Russian is the America's 4th of July?
Yeah, exactly. Did the Russian get any clarity on the question?
I no. I mean, I don't think there's clarity to begin, really. Like, I kind of see it as an unfolding. I don't think there's a definition.
Okay, well, we'll be back again a week from today, 1 o'clock on Friday, the 10th of July, for another live stream session of The Glenn Show.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon.